Hi, I'm Rabbi Nitzan Bergman, the director of Aseret Global, and here we are once again at the Aseret Nation podcast with Rabbi Shalom Schwartz, all the way from Yerushalayim, the founder of the Aseret movement. Shalom, Rav Shalom.
Shalom Rav Nitzan, good to see you.
Great to see you. How are you?
Baruch Hashem, Yom Yom, here we are.
Uh-huh. Okay. Baruch Hashem. Do you think all our listeners know what that means? What does the word Baruch Hashem mean? Baruch Hashem.
Literally, it means blessed is the name. The name
Okay.
is the name that we use to not name God, right? The name that we're not talking about, the man behind the curtain. It's the name meaning the ineffable name, the name that we can't fully grasp. God's God is the infinite one, and therefore to attach a specific name to God is always a limitation of our expression of our relationship with God. So one way in tradition how we handle that is we say, Baruch Hashem, Hashem, the one that is the name, which means he's the unknowable, he's the infinite one. And we just refer to him as the name that is beyond all names.
Uh-huh. Wow. Okay. So you're referring to the fact that, in the Torah, it's written God's name, right? The Yud and the Hey and the Vav and the Hey, we don't even say the letters together, but we say Adonai, which means my master, our master. Right? We kind of give it a almost like a nickname. I think about it sometimes as, you'd meet the president. You wouldn't say his name, hi Donald, whoever it is, whatever president, you'd say, hello, Mr. President. You refer to him kind of in a more of a role, but he has a name. So it's like the name that I'm not privileged or interesting. Okay, well, great intro to today's discussion, because today's discussion is around the third of the Ten Commandments, which is Lo tisa et shem Hashem l'shav. Do not take God's name in vain. And I know something in we always in the Seret method look at every negative as an opportunity for us to interpret as a positive. So if the negative is don't take God's name in vain, the positive would be take God's name in something very good, something very important. And the words we use are, make a kiddush Hashem, to sanctify God's name, to really use it properly and to laud it and to what do you think? How would you even explain what to sanctify means?
Well, I just want to point out, I say I saw an interesting translation when we say in vain, don't take God's name in vain. So we talk about there are the specific, what we call the mitzvah karit, the central commandment that's associated with this tiber is what we call shvuat shav, right? We usually translate that as a vain oath, but I like the translation that I just saw this week, meaningless oath,
Uh-huh.
meaningless oath. So that makes the flip side more clear, right? Don't do a meaningless oath, do meaningful oaths. Don't take
Uh-huh.
God's name in a meaningless way, do it with meaning. And carrying God's name with meaning as opposed to without meaning is what we refer to as this positive application of this particular diber, which is, we'll get to it in a minute to explain it a little bit more, but it means that there's a relationship to God's name that either can be extremely meaningless or even falsely using God's name in actions and in oaths and in all sorts of situations, or meaningful ways. And that can mean attaching his name to an oath, but it can also mean, as the Hebrew itself means, don't carry God's name. Lo tisa, literally in the Hebrew, lo tisa Shem Hashem Elokecha l'shav, means don't carry the name of God in a meaningless way. So carrying means that it's on your shoulders. It's a part of you. The Torah says in Sefer Devarim, Shem Hashem Nikra Aleinu. The name of God is called upon you, meaning it's resting upon you. It's something that the Jewish people were given this role to be the Am Hashem, the nation of God. Atem Edai Ne'um Hashem, you are my witnesses. You're testifying to God by your destiny, by your existence, by your history, by your mission. And that recognition that we carry God's presence and God's name with us, God's name here meaning how the world should ultimately relate to God or even actually relate to God, is through how they relate to the Jewish people. And that concept or that reality actually is something that's totally being lived out in our days. And so when we think about, it sounds like a pretty abstract concept that don't make false oaths, don't make vain oaths, meaningless oaths. But when you actually understand the depth of this particular commandment, it's talking directly to the questions that we're struggling with today. How Israel's being perceived by the world. How do we relate to the moral attacks on the state of Israel? How do we defend them? How do we stand up for Israel? What does it mean to be the object of this hatred of evil throughout history? What's the meaning of that? Why does evil target the Jewish people? What is that showing you? What does that teach you as a Jew about the meaning of our existence as a nation that is representing God? You can put it this way. The first two commandments, which we haven't yet studied together, is the first commandment is about knowing God, about having a relationship with God, knowing He exists, emulating Him, all that's involved in the actual direct connection with God. The second one is don't have other gods.
The first commandment being, I am the Lord your God,
Right.
is okay.
Which we understand to be
Acknowledge,
the
have a
commandment,
relationship. Fine, we'll talk about it. Yeah.
which basically means know there's a God. That's how the Rambam interprets that first commandment.
Okay.
To know God, know who God is, know that He's in history, know that He's in your life, have a relationship with Him, accurately understand who God is. He's the one who took us out of Egypt. He cares about humanity. He gives you freedom. All that's included in that first commandment. The second commandment says, don't have any other powers or gods before me, which is a commandment very far reaching, which we'll discuss next podcast. But the simple understanding is be loyal to that God. Don't go elsewhere for your understandings of power. Don't mistakenly think they're independent powers that are interacting with you in history. It's God. Be loyal to that. Be consistent, and what we call in Hebrew ne'aman. It's not just loyal, it's reliably connected to that truth.
Okay.
And the third one is represent me in the world. Now he's speaking to the Jewish people, and he's saying, which we consider to be the primary description of the Jewish mission, to be Mekadshe Hashem, to sanctify God's name in the world, represent God in the world. Now we should back up a little bit.
Is that a light unto the nations?
Yeah, that's the one way we find it described. We find it as Tikkun Olam. We find it as Or LaGoyim. We find it in Parshat Shmot as being Mamlechet Kohanim v'Goy Kadosh. All of these Tikkun Olam is to repair and perfect the world, as it says. The Netziv of Volozhin says to actually Lashlim et Kol Olam Kulo. We're here to perfect the world together in partnership with God. That's Tikkun Olam. That's one way of phrasing it. Another is Or LaGoyim, which is from the prophet Isaiah, be a light unto the nations, to create a society that spreads light, that actually demonstrates what God's light is in a full society, in order that it should spread to the whole world, as it says that the non-Jewish world in the prophet in Zephaniah and other places, it says they're going to come to us and ask us by their seeing of this light, they'll say, teach us about God. The Jewish people are to provide that spiritual guidance. And it is also directly in the introduction to the Ten Commandments in the phrase Mamlechet Kohanim v'Goy Kadosh, to be a kingdom of Kohanim, meaning spiritual leaders, create a society of spiritual leaders. And Goy Kadosh, in order to do that, you have to be a holy nation. Kadosh, again, the word we started with. Mekadshe Shemecha. To be holy is to sanctify life. It means to show that there's something more than the physical life, and to actually imbue in the physical world a spiritual purpose and a spiritual presence. So that challenge is the Jewish people's mission. And we see it as ultimately an international, what's I'm looking for, a universal mission. We aren't here to be holy for ourselves. We're not also, holiness in the Jewish sense is not some going up on some mountain and fasting all day and talking to God. Holiness is always about bringing God down to this earth, not only going up to God. And therefore, it requires living in this world with an elevated consciousness, with an elevated purpose, and bringing every moment a moment of sanctity. Sanctity, what's a moment of sanctity? When I eat, I don't just eat to feed the body. I eat to feed the body that can express something higher than the body. I could live with doing good deeds, doing mitzvot, loving others, protecting others, doing things that benefit the world in a zillion different ways. But that's the eating is not an end in itself. No material act is an end in itself
Mm.
because it serves a higher purpose. That's what Kedusha is about. It's about elevating the physical reality to a spiritual purpose. And when you do that, we
So some
feel,
dedication. I like that. I always think about the word holy or sanctified as, no, I think most people interpret it as something to do with God, godly, or but really the word means to be dedicated towards a specific purpose, which happens to be God, right? It's really um, sometimes in Hebrew the same word can almost be used as opposites. The word for prostitute in the Bible, in the Torah, is kadesha. She's has a very dedicated work description. So the kadosh meaning it's dedicated. This is here for a purpose, and the purpose is godly. It's to do with God. So yeah, our lives, etc. Living life with purpose, a purposeful life. Driven by God is the Kiddush Hashem.
and it has many applications as a word. You find that, and what's interesting from a Torah perspective, differentiating it from other religions, particularly Christianity, is that when you take the word mikdash, for example, the temple is called the mikdash. It's a building for holiness. We say kaddish on a response to death, right? Because it's the recognition that we can sanctify our response to death. We recognize the soul transcends the body. We say Kaddish, we do Kedusha, we say Kiddush on a glass of wine, because it's not a setting aside theoretically, it's not a set aside ethereally, it's a setting aside of the physical world to sanctify it with a spiritual dimension. So just that it's a very central principle in all of the Torah that we live lives of sanctity. We don't, and in the physical world. And when we come to this diber, which is more ethereal because it has to do with the concept of God's name, but God's name is not meant to be a separate concept detached from life. It's an expression of how we live. What is a name? A name is how we're viewed. The Midrash in Kohelet says that we have three types of names. We have names that our parents give us, names that our friends give us, and names that we make for ourselves. Our friends meaning our society, how we're known by our original birth name, how we're known by the society that we live in, and then you make for yourself a name. And making for yourself a name ultimately is a test of not to end there, but to actually be a sanctification of God's name. So there's like a fourth level here. In fact, in the Mishnah in Pirkei Avot, when it describes different crowns, it's also a concept of carrying something on yourself. Right? What's called the crown of kingship, which is, of course, the government, in our case, the king, the malchut. It's called the kingship of the Jewish people. Was something that you had a crown. You had a crown of the king. He represents the malchut, represents the kingdom. Then you have the keter kahuna, which is the crown of priesthood. And also the Kohen Gadol would wear this very special headgear that represented a keter meaning a crown that showed that he was carrying the name of priesthood everywhere he went. Oh, there's the high priest. See him? Yeah. It represents a holiness, a role in the Jewish people. Then there's Keter Torah, which is something everybody can have, which is the crown of Torah, which is achieved by knowing Torah. We say a Talmid Chacham, a great Torah scholar, gets crowned with Torah. Crowning meaning if he's living with Torah, she's living with Torah in a way that the crown, meaning the representation of the value of Torah, is being perceived by the way they live and talk and teach. They have the crown of Torah. Then the Mishnah continues, though, and says, Keter Shem Tov Ole al Gabehem. The crown of a good name goes on top of each of those, meaning that each of those three has another dimension, which is to not just have a name of a rule, but Shem Tov. Shem Tov is a principle of, well, that person has a good name. It's like if you're in a society and you say, this guy's reputation is sterling. He's known with integrity. He's a person of kindness. He's a person of great dedication and care.
Yes,
That's the
when
name.
you go somewhere, you start meeting people and everyone speaks nicely and like, wow, that's a special person. Rav Shalom, I want to ask you a question. Something that's always bothered me about this. Let me see if I can explain it, my question properly. It seems to be leading us to like, you know, we represent God in the world. Make a good representation. Make sure that everyone views you correctly because you're representing something. I don't like to live to think, yeah, I don't like the pressure or even the focus of I'm doing something to make an impression. How is this different? How is this, what is this saying to us? Carry God's, if we're interpreting this diber as, let's say, carry God's name in a way that brings respect, renown to God's name. Like, here I am. Okay, I'm going to go out today and make a good impression. Why? Because I wear a yarmulke. I wear a yarmulke and, I'm perceivably very, very clearly Jewish and, even, trying to, let's say, observant. I'm a person that is trying to follow the laws of Hashem and the way of life of Hashem. I'm going to make a good impression. People should think, wow, that's a good way to live. It's pretty superficial. It's the wrong, takes away from my inner world and my inner, the right intentions for doing things. It seems to be a wrong intention, actually.
Well, I think, when we raise our children, my wife was very careful when she would send our children out to school each day. She would say, be Mekadesh, the name of our family. Be Mekadesh Shem Schwartz, that our family name should be enhanced by how you live your day. And you could say that's pretty superficial. So your kid's going to go and he's just going to be doing that for his sake of making a good impression, our name, his name. So on the one hand, it is a kind of a minimal level. It's better to have that awareness than to not have that awareness. And people can walk in and not care whatever impression they make of people, and that's a worse lack of awareness, right? So we should
Okay.
acknowledge that making a good impression comes from a good instinct. It comes from a positive desire to influence people in a positive way. And we should know that we influence each other. Of course, it's true. So make a good impression doesn't mean necessarily that they like you, but do things that impress people in a positive way. An impression, an influence should be positive.
Mm.
Just to take, but your the deeper understanding of your question, I think, is the famous whatever. It's a story that they tell based on the Mishnah says, Ezu mechubad mechabed et briot. Who is truly a person worthy of respect, meaning got a good reputation, he's got like Kiddush Hashem. Who is that person? A mechabed et briot, someone who honors others, who respects others. So the turning away from seeking honor to honoring others is the key to impacting the world in a positive way and to going deeper. It's not because I want to impress you that I'm doing good for you. I'm doing good for you because I respect you and I love you. And the result of that will be that I get respect from you. I remember giving a talk once in Toronto in one of a Shabbaton. I was with Rabbi Weinberg, and I remember asking him after my little talk, I said, how did I do? Give me some feedback. I probably said it in a much more subtle way. I didn't say, what impression did I make or how, give me a grade, give me a good grade. I thought I'd given this really good talk and I thought, oh, it's a good time to ask for feedback. But he said to me, Shalom, You were totally focused on yourself the whole time you were speaking, which is your point. You can like you just want to make a good impression. And he said, and I like it hit me like a ton of bricks. I said, "Wow, thanks, Rebbe." And I watched him forever. I watched how he spoke, and he had a way of when he was a big rabbi, well-known rabbi. So as soon as he would walk into a room, tradition is you stand up for a great rabbi, and you'd have hundreds of people in the room, 1,000 people getting up for Rabbi Weinberg, and he immediately would go, "Sit down, sit down, sit down." That was his one of the ways he dealt with that. But and then when he'd get up to speak, you could see his shifting of his focus. The whole focus was on him as he was walking in and people were applauding. And he then shifted it to speak to the group. His eyes and his focus and his energy was totally focused away from himself because he wasn't there to make an impression. He was there to make a difference, to make an impact, to influence. So that shift of consciousness and that
Mm.
shift of intention, I'm not here to make a nice impression. I'm here to do something that sanctifies God's name in the world. And here's a key element. A lot of influencers and a lot of people with power in this world, and all of us, have struggles with, and nisyonot we call them, tests with respect to how much of is it for our ego, so that people like us, today, likes, influencers, how many followers. There's a very big ta'ava, we call it, a desire to be well known, to be famous, to be. I'm the number one influencer in the Jewish world. I'm fighting for Israel. That's the egocentric drive can easily creep up on anyone's consciousness. And this Diber stresses this is not about your name, it's about God's name. And you acquire a lot of humility to make the space, especially when you're influential, especially when you experience your own power to make a difference and to influence, to not see it or identify with it as your own power, but to see it says, Hashem hu anoten lecha chaya la'asot. God is the one that is giving you this strength to do. Right? It's a famous pasuk in last week's parsha, basically a verse in the Torah that says, "Don't say it's my power that's doing this chayal, that's affecting this strength and impact and might." Elas, remember, it's God, the one that gives you chayal lasot. He gives you the chayal, he gives you the strength and the power to do. It's not that he's doing it for us. You have to do it with your power, but he's the one that's giving it to you. And therefore, it's his name that we want to sanctify. And you have to get your ego out of the way in order to accomplish that. So here the Diber is saying you can actually be a very accomplished person and fulfill a lot of Torah, but if your ego is being being fed by these actions, there's no space for God there. It says that a Balgaiva, someone who's filled with himself, there's no room there for God. So this commandment to sanctify God's name requires a lot of humility and a
Mm-hmm.
lot of self-awareness to move your ego aside, to realize that you're a channel for God, not God. That joke about the what's the difference between a neurosurgeon and God? God knows that he's not a neurosurgeon. Right? There's something about more power that we have, especially in realms of life and death, that we can mistakenly connect ourselves with the source of power, not the channel of God's power.
Mm. Wow. Okay, that fits in very nicely with the idea of, purposeful living. Even when you have purposeful living, it whose purpose? What purpose? Some people, don't know why they're living, and they don't ever feel like it's not a purposeful life. Other people have very purposeful lives, but even then, there's still work to be done because it could be, it's for me, it's for my name. And here we're saying, no, the real purpose is you'll be better off. You can do more if you do it for God's name. For what's well,
I wanted to start with this, but I'm going to enter it now. I wanted to dedicate this podcast
oh,
to the foot and Adina, who
sorry, you broke up
brought
a
a lot
little.
of Kiddush Hashem into this world, and they should be
Can
well
you
to
can
do a
you
lot
repeat
more.
that? You broke up a little.
Refuah Shlema of Shlomo Asher Ben Adina.
Oh me. Um, okay. Um, Rav Shalom, making so the idea of a seret is that these are the core values that we live by. Um, so how do you interpret this as a core value, and especially as a nation? What is this? What is this guiding principle?
Because I want to introduce this second half of our talk with going back to the Diber a little bit, so we should
Okay.
have the proper understanding of how we got there. One is most people understand, as we said, that the commandment itself is this shvuat shav, these meaningless vows, which always seem to me to be kind of irrelevant. How many times do you make a vow that a table is a table or a chair is a table, or to do something that's impossible? There are four types. I won't go into all the halachic ramifications, but they seem very not common
Right.
situations that we would
Right.
find ourselves in. And therefore the question becomes, what's it doing in the Ten Commandments? Why is it so central? And more than that, the commandment ends with the words, Ki lo yenakeh Hashem et asher yisad shmo l'shav. God will not hold guiltless he who takes his name in vain, which is interpreted to be, it's like a terrible, terrible transgression.
Hmm.
That's not said by any other transgression. Why would this have the status of being such a terrible thing? So that led us to this research, and we found other sources, but to see that it's not based, the Rambam says it explicitly, it's not just about false oaths and meaningless oaths. It's about this dimension of Chilul Hashem. The Rambam says the reason that these oaths, these false oaths and meaningless oaths are so severe that they have this punishment is because they are Chilul Hashem, it's called, a profanation of God's name, an emptying of the meaningness of God's name. It's one thing to do something, it's another thing to do a Chilul Hashem. So there are those that want to say the reason that it's so severe is because this is the worst thing that someone can do, is to do evil in God's name. Raping and murdering and Allah Akbar at the same time is not just the murder and the rape itself, but it's the destruction of how meaning and morality is viewed in the world. If you're doing it in God's name, you're recruiting God's name to do what you're doing. He's giving you the moral sanction, right? All of this is a complete corruption of our relationship with God. And if you murder one person, you murder that person, even a lot of people. But when you murder people in the name of God, you murder their relationship with God. So you're talking
And
about
others,
something of
everyone else looking on.
exactly, exactly. The name of God means how he's viewed in the world. So you're destroying a relationship to God for all of humanity when you do this publicly.
I
So that
recently I watched Sheryl Sandberg's movie. She made a movie after film, a documentary after October 7th about the sexual violence of Hamas, which she noted kind of no one was talking about. Here she's a woman and fights very much for women's rights, and it's like, woman, where are you? And she went and made this film, and afterwards I just I was so sickened by this what they had done, and I felt sick to be human because human beings had done this. Like any association with these people made me sick. Like I don't want anything to do with them. And you're going to tell me that they are, these are religious people. Well, I'm a religious person. I don't want anything to do with religion. Like they believe in God. You know, out. It really it's very as you said, it's we're not Muslims, we're not radical Muslims. Yeah, but it affects us. It affects us because there's some associations are very delicate and very quick. And okay, sorry, I just wanted
no,
to add that.
you're adding to a very important point, which is the impact of Chilul Hashem, the impact of desecrating God through doing evil in God's name, is very, very deep and very far-reaching. And it's something that the flip side of that is to see that good done in the name of God is very far-reaching. It's one thing to do a good act. It's another thing to do it with an awareness that I'm sanctifying God's name by doing it. I just want to point out, I mean, the Diber is talking very much to the Jewish people as the Jewish people, right?
Mm-hmm.
Everyone carries the name of God, and we are recognized in that way, as I said in the beginning. But it's also, we say that the Torah says that every human being is created in the image of God. So this notion of carrying God's name applies to every human being. So when these Arabs, when these Rishaim have destroyed the godly spark within them to be able to do this evil, you're seeing an emptying. The Hebrew word halal means also a body without a soul. We call a dead body as a halal. So you empty the body, the human being of his soul, and you have a halal, you have a chilul, a desecration of God's name, because the sanctity of being created in the God's image has been wiped out, has been ignored to the point of non-visibility.
Mm.
Now, the flip side of that is non-Jews, of course, can do Kiddush Hashem, as many of them are today. You know, Rabban Osman is a prime example of someone that we work with, and she's standing up, defending the Jewish people. Of course, she's on her way to become a Jew, but her main position, you know, she spoke to the Arab world. She speaks from her own experience being born in Syria and Lebanon, raised in Lebanon, because she has that ability to say, this is a desecration. This we have to this attack and this distortion of history and this distortion of morality has to be called out. And calling that out is a Kiddush Hashem. You know, when I've told on this podcast, when I listened to uh, Ambassador Huckabee speaking to a group of Jews and saying, you are God's people. God made promises to you about this land. He kept his promise. Don't forget, you're going to win this war. I felt the Kiddush Hashem in that room. I felt him sanctifying God's name, reporting on the truth of the Jewish people's relationship to history. As a non-Jew, he was the one who created that Kiddush Hashem. Every Jew's pride was lifted, but not just lifted as, okay, you are a great people. No, you're God's people. And he was lifting a recognition of God in that room. And that's what this Tiber is all about lifting that awareness that God's presence is everywhere. And if you live with the morality of the Ten Commandments, of the Torah, you bring that reality to its fulfillment, to
Mm-hmm.
its realization. Now, we are living in times where this is profoundly impactful on every person in the world, right? Anti-Semitism, as we point out in our film Tragic Awakening, is a result of Sinai. It's a result of the selection of the Jewish people to be the nation of Hashem, the Am Hashem, because we carry God's presence. We represent God in the world. To represent God in the world, you have to know who God is and you have to represent him properly, but you also are the target of those that don't want to deal with God's morality of the Ten Commandments. So that is why we become the target of evil of every generation since Abraham. Abraham stood up against Nimrod and he was persecuted because of that, but he was teaching and representing God's truth in the world and became the target of evil because that threatens those evil people and nations and empires that want to
Mm-hmm.
they stand for a different morality. They want to murder in the name of God. They want to rape in the God. They want to control other people. They don't want to give them freedom. That is the opposite of our morality of the Ten Commandments. And those two things are in direct opposition to each other in today's world, as we have this conflict of civilizations that's going on. And therefore, the targeting of the Jewish people, we call anti-Semitism, that hatred and that desire to actually wipe out the Jewish people is there as a direct reminder of our mission as the Jewish people. We are hated because we are God's people. We are hated because we have this mission and this ability to represent God's morality and truth and presence in the world. And therefore, we are hated because of that. And
Mm.
therefore, we are reminded by the anti Semite of our mission. So it's a very powerful time to awaken to who we are as this anti-Semitism spreads in such extraordinarily, no words to describe it, off the wall ways, this
Yeah, I often
everywhere
think
you turn.
if you want a proof of God nowadays, look at anti-Semitism.
Right. So we are identified again. This is it's a little bit of a subtlety, but these conspiracy theories, everything from what just happened last week in Spain to other places, the Jews are being blamed for everything that happens in this world. As a Jew,
Everything
as a
bad.
religious Jew, we actually take that as a not a compliment, but as an observation of an inner reality. We are responsible for the world. That is our tradition. Not that we're to blame for all these evils that we've done, God forbid, but we are responsible. There's a difference between being
Hmm.
guilty and being responsible. We're not guilty for all these evil things that are happening. Everybody that chooses evil is responsible for their choice. We're responsible for our choices, and we have to choose to live our mission much better to perfect the world. And that is our responsibility. But even the anti Semitism itself is reminding us of our responsibility to the world because we can't ignore it. We can't, God's putting in our
Uh-huh.
faces everywhere you
You're
turn.
saying that guilt or to blame, okay, that's the person that does it. Responsibility is the people that can do something about it. So you're saying, it's pretty profound, I think. I like it. You're saying, as a Jew, we can. We are somehow empowered, and maybe that goes back to Sinai and, what we are empowered to bring this world to its perfection, to shine a light so bright that it dispels all darkness. Uh-huh. So we're not guilty that we didn't do these terrible things, but they somehow, that's incredible. I don't know how they know this, are saying, Jews, where are you? And they're doing it in a very strange way.
No, well, we understand history to be God-driven. Every individual is responsible for the choices. Nations are responsible for their choices. But in the end, the unraveling or the unfolding of destiny of history of the world, in the Torah's view, is a partnership between man and God. And therefore, God is allowing this to happen in order to wake up the Jewish people, in order to bring us back to our mission, bring us back to Israel, because we're hated because of what's happening in Israel. So it's a very direct reminder and wakening up and call for the Jewish people to return to Israel, our homeland, where we're called to fulfill
Happy
this
Sabbath.
mission.
Mm-hmm.
But I want to enter one little sticky point about this, which I think will hopefully help another level of understanding of it, which
Okay.
is in Jewish tradition, when someone is murdered because they're a Jew, as in the Holocaust, as in many times in our history, as in October 7th, we call those people Kedoshim, holy people, sanctified people. Kedoshim, it's a hard word to translate. They're people that are given a status of spiritual elevation that is the highest you can imagine. It's, I won't go into the specifics, but they say that
Yeah, you know what I'm thinking of a definition through this conversation is it brings God into the picture, right? Most of it, we
very
live
good.
in a world, we have a picture of the world. It somehow they brought God into the picture.
Yefa, beautiful. I mean, our prayers we say, Atah Kadosh Shimcha Kadosh. Right? You are God, you are holy, your name is holy, and all these holy ones declare your holiness, right? So you're saying the word Kedoshim is the description of people or beings that bring about a recognition of God in the world. So we said that the Holocaust, as much we could view it as a Chilul Hashem, as a desecration of God's name, on the one hand, because here you have God's people being wiped out, 6 million Jews helplessly being destroyed. But the other aspect of it and the deeper meaning of it is that it was God wanted the Jewish people to experience their relationship to God. So evil, in this case the Nazis, targeted the nation of God as the source of conscience, as Hitler put it, and said,
Hmm.
we have to wipe this out because we're building a new regime, a new historical real. The current Hamas and Hezbollah and Iran see the wiping out of the Jewish people as enabling their vision of Islam taking over the world. And they're targeting the Jewish people because the Jewish people represent that safeguard against that. Our morality is against their morality. As we said, we have different core values, and therefore our core values are being targeted, and we are being targeted as the carriers of this morality of the Ten Commandments, this morality of God. It's subconscious. It's not. It's a spiritual reality.
Hmm.
Anti-Semitism. We can give all sorts of psychological and
Well,
sociological
well, so
and historical
I'm just
explanations.
gonna, just share my thoughts as I do is, they think about the Iranian regime and really what they want is to, dominate this world and to force it into their belief. And it's such a, we say, no, people are free. Every person has their dignity. Every person has their free choice. You can't force them. And they need to get rid of that. It really bothers them that we stand up and say, yeah, you can preach, you can free speech, go ahead. Tell us what you have. But if people don't accept you, they don't accept you. There's nothing you can do. And they're like, no, we want to force them. And we're like, no, that isn't how God made the world. That's not the Tselem Elohim. That's not the image of God in each person. You're violating that. And we stand up and they need to get rid of us in order to do what they want. It's interesting, or do we really do that? Are we really they see that. Do we know that?
So that's the point, is we don't often know that, and we need to wake up to who we really are. That's what this period of history is about. I want to share a story which maybe sound a little bit off topic, but it's really to the point. Maybe it's the
Okay.
good way to end this. I was once with my older sons in Toronto. It was an Erev Pesach, and I was rushing in and out of a bank, and I got into the car, and just as I was getting in the car, this Puerto Rican man stuck his head out the window of the car next to us, and he looks at us and he goes, "Are you a Jew?" I was wearing my kippah. I couldn't deny it. Like here I am, like, and my boys are looking at me. They were like, I don't know, 7 and 9. And I was in a hurry. I didn't really want to stop, but I said to him, "Yeah, I'm a Jew." And I tried to get in my car again. He sticks his head further out of the window and he goes, "Why do you Jews keep on sticking it out after all these years?" So I'm like thinking, what is this, like a candid camera or something? Like I'm putting put on the spot, and it was really an odd kind of interaction. And I wasn't sure whether he was about to attack me or,
Right, right.
yeah, but but my boys are waiting for me to answer, so I had to really respond. And I looked at him in the eyes and I said, "Because we have a covenant with the Almighty." And there was this long pause, and then he smiled and he said, "Ain't it the truth?"
Nice.
There was a
Okay.
there was
That's the whole.
so there's another part to the story, maybe we'll come to another time, but he was there to remind me of my covenant with God and my boys to see that interaction. And why do we Jews stick it out after all the anti-Semitism, and they're wanting to wipe us off the earth? And it's whether we know it or not, we have a covenant with God. And when we connect with that reality, when we can feel proud of that and feel that our mission is going to be fulfilled through us, whether we like it or not. And we should embrace it as something we want to do because it adds to it so much more pleasure and depth and intention and possibilities. Matanya told me, he showed the tragic, Matanya Zilberberg, our head of our Israeli Seret movement here. He showed the film Tragic Awakening a couple days ago. He was in reserve duty. He showed it to his unit, about 40, 50 soldiers. He showed it and they had a discussion afterwards about the meaning of exactly what we're talking about. Why do they hate us? What does it mean? That Sinai. Anyways, the Tragic Awakening film, if you haven't seen it, go see it. But he showed it to them. And at the end of this showing and discussion, one of the soldiers, they had to leave shortly afterwards to do one of their mesimot, to go into what they do as soldiers. They were uncovering some
Mission.
terrorists in the West Bank
Hmm.
that they had to arrest. And the fellow turned to me, he said, after that film and that discussion, I know why I'm doing what I'm doing. I know why I'm going to fight this evil. Thank you so much. It's not just giving me the strength to actually have more motivation, it gives me the depth of understanding who I am and ultimately why I'm doing this. Of course, I'm doing it to defend my family and my country, but I'm also doing it to defend God, to defend God's morality in this world. And that is a deep, deep Kiddush Hashem. That it gives us the
Wow.
opportunity to feel God's presence in every action of every soldier and every one of us that supports them, and everyone who stands up for the Jewish people in this challenging time where we're being attacked.
I'm going to try say back to you how I think you've answered my question is it's not about making an impression. It's about knowing how meaningful it is. Living in a way where, it's meaningful. We are, I don't know if you can say these words, but without making a mistake, I think we are bringing God into this world. We're bringing the recognition of God, the ability to live with God, the this covenant, as you call it, right? This connection we have with God is it's like a marriage. You know, I walk around. Do I ever forget I'm married? Heaven forbid. The moment you forget you're married, are you crazy? Then you're like, yeah. So that's something that's meaningful. We're living it's an incredibly profound mission that we have. And the more we tap into that, yeah, an impression will be made, but we're not doing it for the impression. We're doing it because we need to bring God's light into this world.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for clarification, for the opportunity. Thank you, listeners, for listening with us. And I want to invite people to comment also. If you have comments, please give us your comments. Of course, pass this on to those you think would appreciate hearing this message. And we're nearing the end of this series. We have two more podcasts left. Let us know whether you'd like us to do anything more. As right now we're ending the series. We'd like to know your responses to it.
Oh, great. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.